pathless wilderness, wild, rugged, that was a hardy frontier, far from the paths of civilization.
If you close your eyes, you can pretend it's North Dakota,
Where fortune beckoned with a glittering smile.
Well, have you seen South Dakotans, John? They're insanely hot.
And life hung on the quickness of a trigger finger.
I will do my best to listen more intently.
The Sioux Empire Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Sioux Empire Podcast, the quirky but harmless podcast that's all about Sioux Empire news, comedy, music, and culture. I am your host, Robert Mailing, and I am joined by wingman Seth Glover via phone here because we are recording this on the day of the freak April blizzard that I'm sure as residents of the Sioux Empire you are all too aware of. How's it going, Seth?
Hey, if you think you're not brainwashed, you are, and if you think you are brainwashed, you definitely are brainwashed.
Okay.
And then the world is ice, and we are all penguins.
It feels like it.
Oh yeah, it's another terrible snow ice cake. If anybody wants to know how to make that cake, there's 3 easy steps. Wish for spring, proclaim it's spring, pull out your grill.
Ah, yeah, that's like a rain dance in April to do that.
Exactly.
So it sounds like you had an interesting time this morning in in our lovely spring weather.
So there I was back in 18, the storm that beat the storm of 13, and it's whiteout conditions and just complete sheets of ice on the road. Well, what happened was my girlfriend got stuck coming home, and so I had to go and get her, but I had no means of getting her out of the situation, so we just had to sit there for 2 hours, and the cop came, and the cop was like, it looks like you drove into a snowbank. And she didn't. She was driving on the road. It's just that there was a drift.
Yeah.
It's like, thanks, Officer Becky. And then, she tried to, help us push, but she didn't, there was no coordination between... I should start off by saying I appreciate the police's help. You know, it was wonderful that they stayed there and, made sure we didn't get hit, but it was funny, all right? So I'm going to tell a funny story about it. But, when she was trying to help me, and there's this little 100-pound, officer who's like, your boyfriend and I are going to try and push you out. And I swear to God, she just put her hands on the car and was like, just punch it to Melissa. And, I tried to push, but I swear to God, she didn't try and push at all. And then she was just like, this isn't going to work.
She was like, they're more for moral support for you to push.
Exactly.
You can do it, Seth.
Exactly, yeah. So that was interesting. After we got Melissa out, because we had to wait for a tow truck to come pick us up because the cop didn't have a shovel or a means to pull us out, because I guess they don't do that, just like they don't give rides home. But so after we get Melissa unstuck, after the 2 hours of being there, the cop was following her home, and I had my car there, and I had to back around. But as the cop is passing me, she's like, "Oh, you should just go around the loop back there." She didn't say this, but it was the exact place that Melissa's car had gotten stuck, and I just shook my head, just looked at her and shook my head. I was like, that's not happening. I'm sorry, officer, but I am gonna illegally turn around in the middle of the road here.
Yeah.
And we just got back at 10:30 or so.
Oh,
and
crap.
It's 11 a.m. now. But I tell you what, at least we're not in Western Syria.
This is true. I mean,
I don't feel bad for any Western Syrians. But anyway.
Yeah.
Before he's died, if you think he's fine, eat a dick. Or a missile.
Yeah, it sounds like they'll be eating some missiles.
Okay, Melissa would like to give some, like, a better, more, I can't think of the word, but other opinion.
Not everyone in Syria is for the rebels. Come on, guys.
I said Western Syria.
Not everyone in Western Syria is for that, bro.
Greetings. This is...
Hello.
Hi.
This is Melissa May, and there's nothing more satisfying than feeding your hedgehog by hand.
Very good. You're listening to the Hedgehog Feeding Podcast. I am your host, Robert Mailing.
So I guess I'm on to read my story, Mama, in its entirety, which was heard, at least half of it, on the previous podcast during Seth's book club time.
That is correct.
All right, you want me to just jump right into this?
Go ahead and jump right in. Thank you for joining us, and just hop right in.
What's that sound? It's the sound of Seth's Sioux Empire Podcast bi-weekly book club. The books aren't about the Sioux Empire, but Seth reads them in the Sioux Empire.
The first thought that crosses my mind as my fingers skid across the molding, decaying wood floor. Where's Mama? We had arrived at the old, leaning shack of an abandoned farmhouse late in the night before. Ultimately, Mama and I were lucky to be let in. The surrounding miles were controlled by a gang of ruthless thugs who kidnapped people with a bus on the stretch of road between what used to be Rapid City and Sioux Falls, South Dakota. 8 years after the end of everything as human beings knew it, this type of predatory behavior was all too common. Stumbling, hungry, and dehydrated, I had followed Mama up to what appeared to be a completely abandoned home, hoping for food or something liquid in the new American desert. Mama had tried to break down the door. We were snatched inside and led all the way to the basement before any of the women gathered would make a peep. "What are you doing here?" questioned a bald woman with a slight Middle Eastern accent in a whisper. "Seeking shelter and something to drink like anyone else," Mama responded with the same low voice. "There are demons that roam the night searching for light or sound. Do not draw them to us," a small girl, no more than 10, delivered with eerie sobriety. Not long after that, they left us to a patch of unused floor near a window on the first floor. At that point, I don't recall the stairs or the end of the conversation, but I fell asleep with the clear impression that Mama was next to me. The empty space before me now traced an icy finger down my spine. Over half my life had been on the road to Mama. What would I do if these people had hurt her? I wandered into the main living area from what appeared to be a side bedroom. "Where is Mama?" A man approached immediately and grabbed my arm. "What are you doing here?" There was no whispering in the light of day, apparently. "Leave her be. She's Ellie's girl." The woman from the night before stepped forward from a seemingly large group of girls, and he released me. "That new one that went out today?" She cut her eyes to me for a split second. "Yes, she said to watch out for, the girl until she gets back." "You watch her then, Rafi." He stopped off disgruntled. "Rafi, where is Mama?" She didn't seem to understand me like Mama did, and so I just followed her about in her chores. As she changed babies, "Rafi, where is Mama?" As she calmed the man again from one of the younger girls, "Where is Mama?" As she cleaned the girl's wound and talked about babies, "Mama, Night started to creep in on the edges of the world, and everyone started to get very quiet. Mama? Gray boards covered the windows, and faint pink light faded into the sun. Scraggly dead trees cast finger-like shadows across my face as the sun raced to bed. Where is Mama? Get away from the window, the man tossed out as he herded the rest of the road towards the basement and side rooms. The sky outside turned black almost instantaneously as I turned back to the window. Once more, I thought to myself, Mama? Suddenly, the back of a bus appeared, backed up to the wall. A chainsaw fired up and came through the rotting wood in seconds. Splinters bounced off my face. How did they hear me? What the fuck? Did you make a noise? How the fuck did you draw them? Rothy was running to me, shouting now that the machine was practically drowning her out. Get out! Out the back! Her arms swung wildly as she motioned to a back door that the girls were pouring out of. Screams poured back into the doorway, and one girl stumbled into slash marks across her chest and face. What the fuck are we going to do? Rafi screamed in the man's face. I heard the wall crash down behind me, and my very last thought was, oh, there is Mama. The man that slit my throat was wearing her face.
Wow. Just, wow. Sorry, I've already heard that story once, but it just, like, damn. Very, very well done.
It's super creepy.
Yes.
That's what I was going for.
Yeah, mission accomplished. And not in the, like, George W. Bush banner on a aircraft carrier way, in the actual, like, flashing on your screen kind. But,
it's even funnier when you know that Trump just tweeted mission accomplished.
Oh, God, really? Yeah, I haven't been I try to not watch national news right before I do podcast, because it gets me too worked up.
You kind of can't.
Yep. Oh, well, thank you very much for joining us. Where could people learn more about your work and stuff?
Of course, you can go on to Patreon. It's just Patreon/Melissa R. May, and I'm available there. You can also look me up by any of my works. The End of the World as We Know It is a really easy one to find, which is a book that I'm writing on the apocalypse in South Dakota. Based on the nuclear apocalypse, I throw in some really good Trump jokes, so if you really want to get some shots in at the president without feeling really bad about it, you can read that. It's coming out month by month. You can also look it up by Just Mama, which comes up with my story right there as well.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And you and Seth, stay out of the snow.
Of course, yeah, I'm done with that.
Yeah, I'll bet. Thank you very much.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah.
Thank you, good sir, and I hope that you do the same. Stay safe and warm, and don't work from home. Tell me you can't.
Well, welcome back, everyone. This is Robert Mailing. Joining me today is our guest, Joshua. Okay. It's a running gag on our podcast that I slaughter last names, so here goes. Joshua Sopko.
Hey, you did amazing. That's perfect, man.
Yes! Yay, me!
I tell people it's just like Shopko without the H.
Nice. Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
I got one. And you are the host of the Sioux Falls Startup Podcast, which is a relatively recent newcomer podcast here to the Sioux Falls area. Very good podcast. I've really been enjoying it, getting caught up here on the episodes here before we did this interview. Why don't you, just for some background, tell us a little bit about yourself and then specifically what about your story and whatnot made you want to start a podcast about startups, and specifically one focused on Sioux Falls.
Sure. So a little bit about myself. I used to be, in a past life, a construction worker, so I did a lot of commercial steel and welding and things like that. On a cold, wintry day, kind of like today, blizzard, I was up on a beam welding, and I looked out at the job site and said, I don't really want to do this anymore. So I quit doing construction. I went back to school for graphic design, taught myself to code, and eventually got into the entrepreneurship world, which is really what led me into getting into a podcast about entrepreneurship and getting to know entrepreneurial stories. So when I was looking at doing some different businesses and quitting my job, Google can tell you a lot of things about how to start a business, right? You go get your tax ID and you file with the state and do all this other stuff, and that stuff is pretty straightforward. But what I was struggling with was how to make the leap of quitting my full-time job and actually starting a business or a company. And so what I've always kind of done whenever I don't know how to do something, I can't find the answers, I go find somebody else that's done it, and I ask them about their experience. So that's what I started to do. Yeah, so that's what I started to do. I reached out to some entrepreneurs who I viewed as successful, and I was like, man, how did you do it? You had a wife and young kids when you quit your job, like Paul Tenhaken did, or John Mayer was one of the first guys, and I actually went to high school with him. He's 2 years younger than me. But I looked up to him and I said, how did you make the jump into this full-time entrepreneurial journey? And after every one of these conversations, I left and I thought, this is amazing content, because they all told me how kind of scared they were and how they went through these challenges and struggles, and it was the same feelings that was stopping me, but they went and did it anyways. And so I left every one of these conversations thinking this is amazing, and I wanted to be able to share that content with the rest of the world. So originally, my thought was, I want to take down all these stories and write them out in a blog form, because I really enjoy writing. And I told John Mayer about it, and I said, I want to take these stories and write them down as a blog. And he says, great idea. Nobody's going to read it. And I was like, oh, well, thanks, John. So he said, do a podcast. And I said, well, I don't know how to do a podcast. And, he just encouraged me to figure it out. And that was really how it was born, and how it came to be.
Very, very nice. Let's see. So, what's been one of the more, get us a little bit into, the nitty-gritty of the podcast for those who aren't familiar. It sounds like you look a little bit for, their story and their example. I'm always intrigued myself by the people that, like you mentioned, Paul Tenhaken doing the starting a business, and he had a wife and kids to support and stuff like that. And that always blows my mind, because that takes guts, to do that when you're, especially if you're me, you're a very high anxiety person, or someone that just is a worrier in general. It's kind of well, turn that up to 11,
Yeah. So I just kind of was looking for people who have just made a big leap, and those are people from all walks of life. Sorry, I kind of forgot the first part of your question. I was getting...
That's okay. It was a rambly question, but let's give people an example of what in format can they expect when they listen to an episode of Sioux Falls Startup.
Yeah. So the format is kind of an interesting question, because when I got started doing a podcast, there's lots of different ways that you can put it together. And I've listened to a lot of podcasts. And the ones that I gravitate toward are the ones that aren't overly produced, but they're pretty heavily edited. The interview style ones are great. But when I was going to talk to these entrepreneurs, when I went and did my first interview, I had no idea what I was going to do in terms of editing down the podcast, really. I just went and did these interviews, but all the interviews were, 60 to 90 minutes long. We'd have these great conversations. But there was a lot of rambling, a lot of areas that weren't meaty. And so what I did is I decided, well, I need to cut these down into half-hour episodes to really just bring people the meat of the content. So the format-wise of things, if anybody that hasn't listened, is I kind of talk to them a little bit, and then I cut out the fluff, and I take the meat, and then I summarize everything in between there, if that makes sense. So if you listen to Masters of Scale, with Reid Hoffman. That's really the format that I tried to replicate in my own way. So.
Yeah, and that's the way to do it. I kind of let my podcasts roll. Most of them, some of them I produce like that, like the new one I've got coming out. But especially like Sioux Empire podcast is very onomatopoeia. We just kind of like whatever people blur out, but that's kind of the nature of it is a little bit of a spontaneous kind of like you're sitting around with friends talking environment. So it works for that format. But yeah, if you're doing something that's produced where, especially like in a business podcast, because I listen to a lot of business podcasts, like you need to be a little more polished, and especially business podcast listeners tend to be unlike, I'm a Dan Carlin hardcore history fan, so he sends me once a quarter a 6-hour podcast. I'm like, oh boy, and I just eat it up. But most business podcast listeners are not going to sit through, an hour podcast almost, let alone, something that drags on for 3 hours or something like that, unless you break it up into pieces. But
right, yep.
But yeah, like you said, just getting they want the gist, they want the meat, they want the actionable data from it. They like the inspiring story too, but I'm sure you've been in business environments where you're just kind of like, okay, this, like a presentation or a conference or something where you're like, okay, let's get to the actual like practical, how do I do this nice thing you've just, said we should have.
Yeah, and it's not always easy to put it together, because some of these, Kevin Tupi's podcast was by far the hardest one, because that guy is long-winded. I mean, he gets into a storytelling, and he starts talking about, how he grew up in this trailer park, and things like that. It was a great story, but we really didn't need to know about his neighbor's dog.
Yeah, exactly.
And he just went on and on about these things. Like I said, it was great, but I had 130 minutes worth of content, and to get that down into a half-hour story condensed was a challenge for me. It was a good challenge, it was a fun challenge, but at the end of the day, I think I like to think that most of my listeners appreciate me kind of taking out the pieces that just didn't really matter to the meat of the story, which was him taking this big risk. He had a wife and young kids, and he was working, 8 in the morning until 11 at night, and his wife actually left him for a period of time. Like, he went through a lot. Yeah, I mean, he went through a lot of big challenges in his journey, and that's what I wanted to touch on. That's what I wanted to get out and share with people and say, this isn't easy. It's not for everybody, but it's worth it, because now he's uber successful. His wife took him back. So it's a really inspiring story. So
very cool. So now, in your podcast, you just wrapped up season 1. So
yeah, season 1 was meant to be just a pilot season. I wasn't really sure what to expect, so I was like, I'm just going to do a couple and see the feedback, and the feedback was really good. So yeah, I just did six short episodes.
Very nice. Yeah, and they're good episodes, very solid. Like the Paul Tenhaken one is really good, and then the most recent one here, the season finale, if you will, was pretty good.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's see. Well, when can we expect season 2, or what's your kind of time frame and thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a little bit fluid. I mean, I have hopes and dreams.
You wouldn't be a podcaster if it wasn't loose and fluid. Originally I was thinking I would release it in the fall, but then a lot of people said, hey, we don't really want to wait that long. So I'm probably looking to do a special series this summer, and I've got a couple of ideas about what I want to do, and it might even be a spin-off of this podcast into a whole nother new podcast, which might be a different thing. I'm not exactly sure I'm going to put it all together, but it's dangerous, isn't it? It's like once you do one podcast, it's like, take it from the guy that started with one podcast 4 years ago, and now I'm running 6, and I have two pitch meetings this week from people who have ideas for the greatest podcast ever. So, yeah. But it's addictive, isn't it? Because you get one good idea, and then as you're doing it, you're like, oh man, what if I did a podcast about this?
Yeah, exactly. So that's And the feedback from this one has been so amazing, just in ways that I can improve, and then people that have been sharing, hey, your podcast has really inspired me to either start a business. I've been told that, somebody actually started a business because of my podcast.
Oh, that's cool.
So I was like, well, I have to keep going now. But that's spun into, other people have said, I related so much to this person and their story. It really encouraged me to, keep driving and keep pushing on and keep pushing through these challenges. And I was like, man, I kind of want to keep going with that theme and finding ways to inspire entrepreneurs or people that are on the fence who are just like me just a few months ago when I quit my full-time job, as a web designer, web developer, and started my own company in web design and web development. And that's a big deal, and I want to keep pursuing and inspiring people that way. And I think waiting until fall to not release anything might be too long. So one of the things that I'm really toying with wanting to do, if I can get enough interest lined up for guests, is do a sort of summer run somewhere in June with maybe 3 to 4 people. I don't know how many people I'll get, but I want to highlight failure stories. And everybody says, that'd be so amazing. You'll never get anybody to do it.
You'd be surprised.
Well, I mean, I put a couple feelers out there, and I've only got a handful of responses. But the goal of what I want to do is to find people that have started a legit business where they quit their full-time job, they went all in on something, whether it's a boutique or a restaurant or a clothing, whatever it is. And for whatever reason, doesn't matter why, but they couldn't make it work and they had to shut it down. And it doesn't even matter what they're doing now, if they're a successful entrepreneur, if they, found another job, whatever it is. But the point of that is they took a big risk. They tried it and they failed and they're still here.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people say, well, what if I fail? It's like, well, what if you do fail? Worst case scenario, you're still going to be here. And I really want to highlight and get that perspective from people that have been there, and just kind of find out their journey and their story and what they're doing and what that's like. So that's something that I'm really hoping to get out this summer as part of the Sioux Falls Stories podcast.
Very cool. Let's see. So yeah, that was my other thing, was to get into the Failures miniseries.
Yeah.
Let's see. What do you think is the biggest surprise you've learned from these entrepreneurs? Because you launched into this trying to learn yourself about how to pursue this. What is there anything that like sticks out to you as being like, man, I did not see that coming when I launched into this?
One of the questions that I ask every entrepreneur is, what's your definition of success? And I always toyed when I started to ask the same questions. I changed the questions, but I've stuck with that question for every entrepreneur because every time the answer is different. And I appreciate that so much because we all start this journey with this idea of what success looks like. And 99% of the time it's money or finances or something like that. But when I've talked to an entrepreneur who's been doing this for 3, 5, 10 plus years, they never say that. Their definition of success is always different, and it always surprises me, and I always appreciate their perspective. And so I love to ask that question: is how do you define success today, and how does that maybe differ than what you define success as when you started? Because a lot of times I think, or I thought before I started my business, well, I'll be successful when I get to 100 clients, or when I get to 100,000 in revenue, or when I get to 500,000 in revenue. And all these entrepreneurs said, yeah, I used to think that way too. And now they say, now my definition of success is, having 30 employees that go home and are able to feed their families. It's like, man, that's pretty damn awesome. That's what gets them up in the morning to pursue their business, is take care of their employees. And I just appreciate that so much.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's kind of a tangent here, but it's what we do at the Sioux Empire podcast as tangents. Is it always blows me away when you get into like the management leadership kind of role in a business, the threat of how am I going to pay my employees and stuff like that, because it's just like, it's one thing if you're like, well, I guess I'm going to be eating ramen this month or something like that, when you're just like starting out and you're on your own in like an apartment or something. It's another when it's just kind of like, I can't pay Bob, and Bob has kids, and oh crap,
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I appreciate about Paul Tenhaken's story, is because he went through that. If you listen to his episode,
Yep.
he went through a period where he couldn't make payroll. And Kevin Tippy was the same way. He got a phone call, and he says, I still have that feeling in my stomach, and he says, I remember exactly where I was standing when my accountant called me and said, hey, we're not going to make payroll. Those are two very successful entrepreneurs that went through that, and to hear their story of like, holy crap. But that's the one thing that scares me the most about hiring an employee. Even as I sit here today, I've been talking with my wife. I said, I can't take on any more work right now without being able to hire someone. But how do you hire someone and expect to pay them? What happens when the work comes in? And, yada, yada, yada. And I look to these stores. I'm actually really excited to officially get going on season 2, so I can kind of start pinpointing that a little bit more. Again, it's very self-serving to me that I get to have access to these entrepreneurs and get to ask them questions that so many other people would just kill to ask.
Yeah. And I find that something with podcasting that, I'm always warning people, because I've helped people start a lot of podcasts, that you're not, Mark Maron or whatever, and you're not going to get like rich and millions of listeners and blah, blah, blah right off the bat or anything and you may never get like a huge following with the podcast. But for me so far, even after doing it for like 5 years, the value has been in the connections and networking and the skills I've learned. I mean, podcasting has made me a better communicator. It's made me a better business person. It's made me a better managing a team. Even programming, my day job. It's like it's even helped me with that because of my side projects where I try to like set things up on my website for the RSS feed and stuff like that. It's just like that, just so many skills you pick up from it and whatnot. Podcast always has that the kind of like undersold benefits that aren't even like related to podcasting. But
yeah, absolutely. And I agree 1,000% with everything that you said, that it's not the financial gain, if there is any, that makes what I'm doing worth it.
Yeah.
It's the connections alone that have proved to be invaluable. I'm now on first name basis with a lot of people who would never know me, and if I have a struggle or a problem, I can call them and say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, would you help me? And I can comfortably now invite them out to coffee, and be able to have access to them, which is a really big deal from a self-serving standpoint. And then kind of to add to that point, I was just talking to a friend yesterday about the podcast. He says, I really like the format. He says, but the commercial's annoying as hell. And I said, because I've got one commercial, and it's for my own web design business. And I kind of laughed, and I said, yeah, I get it. I don't like commercials either. And he said, I'm sure you never sold a thing out of there. And I said, that's not true. I've actually sold 4 websites off that commercial through 6 episodes.
Nice.
So I never intended to have ads or have commercials or anything like that, but I wanted to have that as an option and open it up for just a capability for later on. Never expecting anything to come from it, but I wanted to have my users expect that, hey, there's going to be a commercial somewhere in the middle of this. And so I just said, well, I'm never going to be able to sell a commercial. It's not even worth my time to go deal with right now, so let's put my own on there. And I managed to sell 4 websites. I was pretty impressed with that.
Very nice. So let's see. Joshua, where can people learn more about you and the Sioux Falls Startup Podcast?
Sure. So we have a website which is going to go under a major construction project here in the coming months and weeks. But it's SiouxFallsStartupStories.com. So super long name, but it's available because it's just a string of letters. But so SiouxFallsStartupStories.com. I think I've got my podcast on all the podcasting feeds. If it's not on there, you can send me an email. Go to the website and fill out the contact form and let me know that you can't find it. That was one major hurdle that I had starting this podcast. When John Meyer told me to do a podcast, I said, John, I barely know what, to me at that time in my life, just a few months ago, an MP3 was something that I downloaded from Napster in high school.
Yeah.
So to go buy audio equipment and go do this recording, and it's not that I'm not a tech-savvy person, because I'm a web developer, but in the same sense, that's a far cry from opening up an audio file.
It's a different kind of tech.
It's pretty crazy. I was super intimidated by it. So I tell people my learning curve for this is basically trying to scale a brick wall. But so when I got everything all done, it's like, okay, so I got it all up on the website, and then I had to push it out to these podcasting feeds. And I don't know all the podcasting platforms, so it should be on all the ones now. I know that when I first launched, I had a lot of people emailing me saying, hey, I can't find it on Podbean. I can't find it on, this app that I use. So I think I've got those results. So it should be wherever you go find your podcast. If you just search for Sioux Falls Startup Stories, it should be available somewhere. So,
well, sounds good. Joshua, thank you very much for joining us. And
thanks, Robert. I appreciate you having me on. This was fun.
Yeah, and we'll have
it's
to.
a shame I couldn't be there in person.
I know. I was just telling the other person I interviewed over the phone today that I was just like, we'll have to do a redo weekend at some point where I actually have you guys and let you actually see us face to face would be cool, But thank you for bearing with us with our interesting spring weather, and stay out of the snow and take care of yourself.
Sounds great, Robert.
The Sioux Empire Podcast proudly presents this week's Shameless Plugs.
Well, everyone, it's just me. So for shameless plugs this week, I'm going to go ahead and take a couple since I'm the only one doing it. Let's see. And I will include links to our guests that we've interviewed in the show notes, so you can check that out and you can learn all about them through that. But a couple things I want to plug are the, my other podcasts like Urban Indians Podcast, Perlocution, Tactical Pain. Those are all at thesioux.empire.com, and you can learn all about them there and subscribe if you want. If you enjoy our podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you went on iTunes, SoundCloud, wherever you're listening, and gave a good review. iTunes, give us 5 stars. Tell us what you like about the podcast and let other people know about it. That's how we grow, is just word of mouth and people that enjoy it and enjoy hearing some original local content and hearing what's going on in their community. Let's see. And then I also want to plug the Macabre Grimoire podcast starting May 1st. That's our paranormal, sci-fi, paranormal, weird history investigations podcast, where it's me, being the history nerd with Google. So I call myself a historian. And then Ari Sho, who is a medium, so she can do cool readings and dream interpretation and stuff like that. We recorded an episode about that was pretty cool. Let's see. And then magician Travis Nye with his, sleight of hand and his investigative and observational abilities also joining us. And so it's a great show. Starts May 1st. Be sure you check that out. And then lastly, I was going to mention that we are officially, the Sioux Empire, that is officially a sponsor of the Sioux Empire Film Festival again this year. We've got a lot of really great films that were in the selection lineup. And we actually have Seth did an extended interview with the director from South Dakota of the film Tater Tot and Patent. We have that on file, an extended bonus interview, and we will be putting that out the week of the film festival. So, we'll be covering that and bringing you updates on everything with that. And we hope to see you at the Sioux Empire Film Festival. And like I said in the previous interview, that'll be at the Washington Pavilion. So thank you for listening. I hope wherever you are safe and you are not trying to drive through too bad a snow. Hopefully by the time you're listening to this, we're in better spring weather. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of the week.